Metallic red Thousand Suns are easily one of the most striking and recognizable paint schemes in 30k. There are a couple steps you have to take though in order to get a really deep red candy apple color that is visually interesting. In this video, I'll show you the steps that I use to make this Thousand Suns tactile marine. Let's get started. I start off on the armor by applying a layer of dark silver over black undercoat. I use Vallejo metal color magnesium here, but any dark silver color will do. I next highlight this with a brighter silver, in this case aluminum, also in Vallejo metal color. This highlight is fairly general, and I apply it like I would apply any other airbrushed highlight to a Space Marine's armor. This silver step is the first key to getting good candy color, and it is important to build up your highlights here, as we will be applying the clear red over the entire model. This means that all of our highlights and shades will have to be done prior to applying the clear red layer, if we want to have any contrast on the model. I also spray some thinned down purple ink into the shadows of the model here for the same reason. Purple is used here specifically, as I really like to use purple to shade red, as I just think it looks a lot more interesting than just a dark red, as you get some color contrast as well as the value contrast. Once the model is highlighted and shaded to my liking, I start applying multiple thin coats of Tamiya clear red over the entire model with my airbrush. I have tried a number of other clear paint alternatives, such as GW contrast paints, but I have found repeatedly that the only way to get the best candy colors with the deepest and most vibrant color is to use Tamiya clears. There is one caveat here though, which is that it's critical to apply Tamiya clear in many thinned down coats. And forget 2 thin coats here, I'm talking like 6 or more. This is for 2 reasons, with the first being that Tamiya clear paints are rather thick right out of the pot, so if they're not properly thinned down, they'll gum up details and look pretty nasty. The second, and most important reason though, is that by applying many layers, you gradually build up a more vibrant and rich color than you'd get by simply spraying one thicker layer. The first layer I do here looks pretty pathetic, but I keep on spraying and apply more and more layers and the color starts to build. Tamiya clears are a bit different than your normal acrylic paints, so there are a couple things here to note. The first is that I have no idea what they're actually made of, but they smell pretty wild, so please use a mask and proper ventilation when airbrushing with these paints. Also, I have heard people say that certain thinners have caused the Tamiya clear to become gummy and clog up their airbrush. I've never had any problems myself, and I use Vallejo's airbrush thinner, but I'd recommend that you either just use Tamiya's thinner, or test out your thinner and clear interaction in a separate cup prior to mixing them in your airbrush, so you don't have a nasty mess to clean out. For this Thousand Sun Marine, I did a total of 6 coats of clear red. I have learned that when doing this scheme, whenever you think you're finished with the red, do another layer or 2 over and reevaluate. A lot of times when I see people struggling with this scheme, it's because they haven't applied enough layers, and their model looks either kind of washed out or still pretty silvery, or orangish. You also want to make sure that each layer is fully dry before moving on to the next step, or else there is a chance the clear paint might pool or bleed. I would highly recommend using a hairdryer to speed up this process. I then spray the entire model with a coat of Vallejo gloss varnish to prepare for the oil steps coming up next. I use a fairly standard black oil wash for the model, which is just lamp black oil paint and some white spirits. If you've not used oil washes before, however, I'd recommend that you check out my video in the upper right hand corner for a deeper dive into them. This wash is applied fairly carefully into all the recesses of the armor, as I want to provide additional contrast and definition to the armor without staining the main portion of the plates. I also think the oil wash step is extremely important for colored metallic schemes such as this, as without it, different armor plates are not clearly defined. Also, the matte finish of the oil paint contrasts nicely with a glossy metallic red and adds a little bit more texture contrast to your model. Once the oil paint is dry, I use a makeup sponge to wipe away any accidental oil overspill and then seal the model with Vallejo matte varnish. I use a specific matte varnish here, as I found that the Vallejo matte varnish isn't actually that matte and more of a satin finish, and I like the way it looks with metallic schemes. I'd recommend, however, experimenting with other varnishes here to get an effect that you're happy with. The decals for this model start off fairly straightforward, and I just placed a decal on each of the shoulder pad and then used microsol to soften it up. But something kind of weird happened in the corners of the shoulder pads. I can't tell exactly what happened, but it looks like the microsol actually stripped away some of the clear red and left this patchy metallic area that doesn't look too good. I was able to touch this up by brushing on some clear red, but I think that going forward, I'll make sure that I don't let the microsol pool and will actually dab off any excess with a paper towel. The weathering on this model was fairly straightforward, as all I really did was to sponge chip some scale 75 heavy metal onto the edges of the armor. I use silver chipping for all my metallic color schemes, as I think it looks really cool and suggested the clear lacquer on top is chipped off. There are also a few places on the model that the sponge shipping didn't really catch, so I went back and half stippled, half edge highlighted heavy metal using a detail brush. When stippling here, I don't try to get a straight and crisp edge highlight, but instead, I rapidly tap my brush on the edge to simulate micro scratches and worn dings. If you want to take your weathering to the next level, you can also add a few small scratches across the armor by using a fine detail brush and a metallic silver paint to draw small lines. The gold on the shoulder pad trims and leg studs was first painted with Scale 75 decayed metal, and then a layer of Scale 75 dwarven gold was applied over top of that. I also gave the top part of the shoulder pads a light wash of Games Workshop's Reichland Flesh shade to give a little more definition and shading to this flatter part of the shoulder pad trim. For the straps across the chest and the ribbing behind the knees, I simply applied a layer of black metal and washed it with Nuln Oil. This might not be the most interesting or visually appealing way of painting these parts of the model, but it looks good enough for your basic Marine and will help get your troops on the table quickly. For the eye lenses, I used a fairly simple technique in which I first paint the eye lens with a bright silver and then apply a layer of Games Workshop shade over the entire thing. In this case, I used Scale 75 speed metal and then Beal Tan green. I find that this is a pretty quick and simple way of getting good looking eye lenses that doesn't require a number of very finicky and thin layers. The bolter was also painted pretty simply, with the casing being first painted black and then lightly sponge tipped with Scale 75 heavy metal. The metallic portions of the bolter are painted with Scale 75 heavy metal and then washed with Nuln Oil shade from Games Workshop. Again, this is a pretty simple process, but I think it looks good enough for basic troops, and is one less thing to edge highlight. I finish up the model by lightly dusting tan northern powder on the Marine's lower legs. This powder matches the same that I used on the model's base. I think it helps tie the base and the model together better. I also don't seal the powder here at all, and instead just make sure I don't touch the powders when I use the model in games, as I find that most sealants ruin the dusty effect. After that, I just attach the model to the base, remind you all to like and subscribe to my channel, and then paint the base rim black and the model's done. Thanks for watching, and I'll be on.